Let me hold you right there. Let me bring in Mr. Padowitz. Now, she came back into the house. I mean, you know my position on stand your ground is I'm opposed to it, but I also feel you can't have different applications, different time. Mr. Padowitz, how is, if she had been hospitalized year before, he's got a record, and he just told her if he couldn't have her, no one would, and she had just had a child 9 days before. How does this not qualify for stand your ground, as much as I or others may question the law?
Well, Reverend Sharpton, you're correct in questioning on this case. This is a prime example of the abomination of the stand your ground law. It relies upon the discretion of a judge at a hearing to determine whether or not the law applies in this particular case. And from the facts that I've seen, not being in the courtroom, but from the facts that I've seen, she never left the house. She was in the garage, which was part of the house. The garage door was broken. She couldn't get out, and so she had to come back into the house in order to exit through the front door.
But Ken,
so here the judge made a decision.
Ken, she's facing 20 years, and no one was hurt. She said she shot the ceiling. If whatever happened, no one was hurt. How is she facing 20 years in jail?
And that's the injustice here. Not only is the stand your ground law not being applied, which many people would believe should be applied here, but now we have minimum mandatory sentencing laws here in Florida and across the nation where the judge's hands are tied. Once the jury came back and convicted her of aggravated assault and discharging that weapon, there's a minimum mandatory of 20 years in prison in Florida, which to me, again, is very unjust, is unfair, and the prosecutor here should step forward even after the conviction.
To discharge the gun in Florida, Charles, a minimum 20 years. Now, she was offered a plea, to be fair.
And that seems to be more of the issue here, not so much of whether it's a stand your ground, whether she was guilty or not. I mean, it is an issue, but I think the real issue is really the sentencing. You know, there's two ways with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. You can either get 3 years or 20 years. It's a pretty big gap, and I think that's really what the controversy here is. And again, she did have an opportunity to take a plea deal that was offered to her up to 3 days before the trial, on the Friday before. The trial started on Tuesday, so a few days before the trial. So I think that's really become the issue here. The stand your ground is something that, you know, it's a very subjective process. Even today in court, the judge was unable to even really...
But Ken, do you think a lawyer will be criticized for not advising her to take the plea? I mean, how do you get around this disparity from 3 years to 20?
Well, I'm certainly not in the shoes of that lawyer, don't know all the facts, but from what I do know, there's some serious questions for this lawyer. Did he not advise his client to take a plea offer of 3 years? Did he not tell her and explain to her in detail the chance that she was taking in Florida with these minimum mandatory sentencing laws and 20 years that she was facing in this case? So there are some serious questions for this lawyer as to whether or not he properly advised his client and did the right thing. But the prosecutor should step up here, even after the conviction, and get rid of the 20-year minimum mandatory. It appears to be very unfair in an application.
Is it the prosecutor's discretion? I mean, it's the law, you say. It is the prosecutor's discretion.
Law, but the prosecutors are ministers of justice, and this prosecutor can look at the facts of this case, and he can ask the judge to come down, get rid of the 20-year minimum mandatory, and apply a sentence that's fair, Charles, in this case, as opposed to the application of this 20 years.
Charles, this young lady will be sentenced on May 11th. She faces 20 years. There's a record here of abuse, record of her being in the hospital, husband threatened her. I'm sure there are thousands of stand your ground conservatives that's there marching and rallying for her, right?
Oh yeah, it's been almost every day, and that's really kind of what drew the attention here in Jacksonville with some small protests, and then
I'm talking about the big stand your ground guys, NRA, Alec, all of them are there, right?
You know,
yeah, that's what I thought. Charles, thank you so much for your time tonight. Ken Padowitz, thank you both for being here tonight.
No problem. Thank you, sir.
We'll be right back.